Welcome everyone to another painting video. Let's get right into it with my palette. I have crimson, burnt umber, burnt sienna, and I think this is probably ivory black. We got some yellow green, some viridian hue, ultramarine blue, and titanium white, as well as some sky blue, which I added a little bit later in the painting. And we're also going to jump right into the painting with putting on the sketch here onto a toned canvas, which is toned with burnt sienna, and the size of the canvas is 11 by 14 inches. I didn't do any sketches before putting the sketch on. This was a first try for the composition, but I didn't really think too much about it. I really just wanted to start painting. So here I am putting on a messy sketch, and there is the finished product. And then I took the same brush, which is a very small round brush. It's probably like a number 2 synthetic bristle round brush. And I just started to throw on some colors rather haphazardly, starting with what is furthest away and then working my way forward. So, yep, starting in the sky there. And I didn't mind too much that in the initial stages my paint was very thin, because I work on my paintings in layers. I don't do alla prima or wet on wet for paintings like this. I do layers and then I let it dry, and then I come back to it and paint over the top of the dry layer or relatively dry layer with another layer. So you can see I had a lot of that burnt sienna from the tone showing through. I didn't care about that. I just wanted to get the block in, which is where I cover the entire canvas with my first layer of paint. And then here you can see I'm switching to an angle brush now, a little bit bigger coverage. And I'm starting to add a little bit more into the sky. But yeah, I'm still pretty much painting the entire thing with that smaller round brush. And I would like to mention again that I didn't do any planning for this painting. I just jumped right into it, because that is going to have consequences later on in the painting that we'll see as I start to flesh this out. Like I said, I didn't even sketch it out before I started to paint, which is something that I don't normally do. I like to sketch everything out, plan it out, get the composition together before I put a drop of paint onto the canvas. And aside from some reference photos that were vaguely similar to the idea I had in my head of what I wanted to paint, I didn't even have anything to look at. Now, you might be an artist who can paint something purely from your own head, but I really operate at my best when I'm looking at a reference photo that offers me the guidelines for how it should look, because if I just paint from my head, I can stray very quickly from reality. And I like to capture not necessarily a very, very realistic form of what I'm going for, but I like it to be, realistic to some extent, so that you know exactly what you're looking at. When I paint from my head, that can get off pretty quick. Now let me talk a little bit about mixing colors, because I get a lot of questions on that topic from my viewers. And before I talk a little bit about the colors that I was using for this particular painting, I would like to mention that when it comes to mixing colors, and I've heard this from other artists that I am subscribed to on YouTube, I don't really keep a very closely monitored list of all the colors I'm mixing at all times. I really go by feel a lot, and I think it is important to, as you see me putting my finger in front of those cliffs, to see if I want to keep them or not. I think it's important to be a little bit more free with your color mixing, so that you don't feel like you're stuck in a formula of I have to mix this color with that to do see rocks. Or whenever I'm doing water, I have to make sure I use ultramarine blue and, 3 parts titanium white with burnt umber. I think that type of painting can very easily stunt your growth as an artist because you are feeling so boxed into a formula that it can kill your creative expression. There are a lot of artists who paint very different from other artists, and I do understand that people want to learn from the masters and paint like the masters, but there comes a point when you have to realize you're never going to paint exactly like somebody else because you're not that person. You are a unique person, and you're only going to be able to paint like you, which is good news because you have a corner on the market for developing your own unique painting style. Again, that doesn't mean that you don't learn from other people who do things a certain way. I have learned a lot from other artists, just so long as you keep in mind, as we look at the finished block in here, that you have to develop your own style. And don't feel bad if you do things a little bit different from others. Such is the case with even the great artists of the past. Now let's check in with how the painting is progressing. Unfortunately, at this stage in the painting, my lack of planning beforehand is starting to show. I don't really like where it's at, and I don't really like where I'm going with the painting. So I had to step back, put a pause on everything, take a picture of the painting, and go on to my computer and just tweak the composition digitally. I really should have done that beforehand, but I think when I started this painting, I just wanted to get into it and start it, and I was maybe a little bit too eager, and I skipped a lot of the planning process, which for me is detrimental. That's the reason why I hit this roadblock. I'll show you a few pictures here of some digital designs that I developed off of the picture I took. So I tried a few different things like darkening the sky, taking some of the elements of the painting out, adding them back in, and then also painting over the image digitally to see if I couldn't make it work somehow. And I think I have an idea now, but basically the values weren't working out. A lot of the composition actually wasn't working out. Really, I can't think of one thing that was working out other than a few of the shapes in the wave. That's really all I like about it so far. So I'm going to take what I designed on the computer and make those changes. Let's get into it. Getting back to the topic of color mixing, which is a great topic, we've learned so far not to squelch our creativity with very specific formulas of how to mix color for certain things, but also there is a lot to be said on the opposite end of the spectrum for learning the techniques of color mixing. For example, let's say, as in the case with this painting here, I want to paint a sky that looks very dreary and overcast. If I don't have a proper grasp of color mixing, I may think, well, skies are blue, so therefore I'll just use blue paint. Let's say sky blue and titanium white. The sky would look very clear and very bright. We wouldn't be able to capture that overcast sky that we really, really wanted to. And that goes into how I painted my overcast sky in this particular painting. I know that complementary opposites, which are colors that sit opposite each other on the color wheel, can be used very effectively when you want to convey certain moods in the sky, because complementary opposites tend to battle each other for dominance and end up graying each other out. So with this painting, I employed that technique of complementary opposites to create my overcast skies with my own artistic uniqueness. But now we are working a little bit more on the wave. This was dry brushing, which is a technique that I use a lot when I want to show some mist or spray from the waves, because the background was pretty much totally dry, and for dry brushing you need the background to be dry. Here I'm starting to add a little bit more detail, and I'm still trying to work out in my mind how things are going to work together. And I have this huge rock right in the foreground, and so I know it's going to be pretty heavy there. Thus, I kept the sea cliffs in the background to kind of balance out that weight of this rock in the foreground. And I had the idea to make it blend with the water a little bit better, of having quite a bit of watershed coming off of it. Another thing that I decided to do is I decided to raise that background cliff up a little bit. But as I was painting it in, I left a little bit on the left edge unpainted, just with that background sky showing through, and it gives the illusion of some mist or fog hanging over it. I still am not happy with the composition totally. I have to work on it, but I can only attribute that to the fact that I didn't have a plan. Questions came up much later in the painting that I could have answered even before I began painting if I would have planned it out. Questions like, where specifically is this rock going to be? Or how specifically is that wave going to curl in? And I just didn't even think about it because I wanted to get into painting. So it's a grind. I have done a few things you can see here. I'll just show you really quick. I dropped the top of this wave down a little bit. It was a little bit higher before. I changed this area over here. I added some rocks right there. But even with some of the water that I'm going to put on that's being shed off of this rock, I might even change the rock in the foreground here quite a bit. I'm not sure, but like I said, this is a grind because I didn't plan it out beforehand, so lessons learned. Let's try to finish this painting up. Right here you can see one of the directions I started to go right before finishing up this painting with the details is I thought maybe I wanted to add a little bit more definition to the background cloud formations, but then I just kind of ditched the idea because once I put it up I didn't really like it. And now I'm getting my detail brush, which I don't think I've used in a little while for some reason, but it was really nice. It's a 00 pointed round brush. My plan for the lighting in this painting was to have it be overcast with a bit of ambient light shining through the clouds. And so that offered me the chance to add in some sparkly highlights of titanium white, which, as a little side note, if you use too much titanium white from the outset of your painting, you're not going to have anywhere to go with the highlights because you've already used titanium white, which is as light as we can get tonally speaking. So because I've held back on that pure titanium white, I'm able to add in those sparkly highlights that will indicate some of that ambient light. So along with that, I'm adding in some very refined details here of little swirls in the wave of white water tendrils that are being caught up in the curl, which is probably my most favorite thing to paint when it comes to seascapes. Here you can see a sped up version of me painting a lot of those highlights, which I did employ a very specific strategy for painting the highlights in the white water and on the waves. What I did was I focused the majority of my brightest highlights in a certain area on the painting, which was kind of right down the middle. And so therefore, what that meant is I would hold back on adding very much highlights at all, really, on the edges of the painting, on the left edge and on the right edge. It creates a sense that the light is coming from a specific area, from, let's say, the sun shining down from a certain position in the sky, and it adds a really unique quality to the painting, which I really enjoy capturing, and which is also very easy to do if you have a strategy like that. So yeah, I held back on a lot of my brightest highlights on the left-hand edge of the painting and on the right-hand edge, and I focused them down the middle of the painting. Thank you guys so much for watching, as always. If you have any comments, you know where to leave those. But yeah, we'll catch you in the next video, and until then, God bless you guys. We'll see you later.